The night the firefighters arrived at our house, my stepfather understood that the hell he created had turned against him. For 7 years, he humiliated me in the darkness of my bedroom. My revenge was to humiliate him under the brightest lights in the entire town. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, my dears. What an immense joy to be able to talk with you today. My name is Martha Johnson, but everyone here in Oak Ridge knows me as Grandma Martha. I'm 73 years old with plenty of life experience and stories that time hasn't been able to erase from memory. I was born in Westfield, Indiana, but it's been almost 30 years since I settled here in this blessed little corner of Oak Ridge, Virginia, where I found peace after so much suffering. These days, my life is simple and peaceful. Every morning I wake up with the sunrise, make my coffee on the wood stove I insist on keeping. Coffee on a gas stove just doesn't taste the same. You know that, right? Then I go tend to my plants. I have a yard full of medicinal herbs and colorful flowers that are my pride and joy. Each little plant has its name and story. I talk to them while watering them, believe it or not. But plants listen to us, you know? On Tuesdays and Thursdays, I teach embroidery at the Women's Association here in town. I started that about 15 years ago when Mabel from the pharmacy saw me making a decorated dish towel and asked if I'd teach other ladies. In the beginning, it was just a small group, 5 or 6 women. Today, we have more than 20 students of all ages. There are even young girls who come to learn, saying it's therapy for anxiety, and it really does work. While I embroider, I like to tell life stories. The girls all listen with wide eyes when I start talking. Grandma Martha has such tales, they say. And it's true, my life could fill a book, one of those thick ones that takes 2 days to finish reading. But before continuing my story, I wanted to make a special request to all of you watching. Tell me in the comments, which town are you watching from? And what time of day did you find this video? Early morning with coffee, after lunch, or late in the evening? I always read all the comments and feel so happy knowing where you're from and when you take time out of your day to listen to this grandma's stories. Let me know, okay? Let's create a chain of affection. You know, my dears, my life wasn't always this bed of roses it is today. There was a time when I lived a nightmare in my own home, a time that made me know the worst in human beings, but also taught me about strength I never imagined I had inside me. It's that strength I want to talk about today, the strength of a girl who had to grow up too fast to survive. The story I'm going to tell isn't easy to hear, nor was it easy to live. It's a story about how a 14-year-old girl found a way to free herself from the monster who lived under the same roof as her, using only the intelligence and courage God gave her. Because sometimes, my dears, it's in the most difficult situations that we discover what we're capable of. I was born in Westfield in a simple wooden house, the kind with floorboards that creaked when you walked on them. My father, Joseph Johnson, worked in the cornfields that were the livelihood of many people back then. A hard-working man, he came home with calloused hands, but always brought a smile on his face, and, when he could, a handful of candies for me and my siblings. My mother, Eleanor May Johnson, was a seamstress with golden hands. She made dresses for the town girls and mended clothes for workers in the area. With the leftover fabric, she made dolls for me and my younger sister, Daisy. There were 4 of us siblings, me, the oldest, then came Charlie, who everyone called Chuck, Daisy, and the youngest George, who never got to know our father. Our house was small but cozy. It had 2 rooms, one for my parents, another where the 4 of us kids squeezed into 2 beds. The kitchen was the heart of the home, with a wood stove that warmed everything on cold days and a long table where we ate meals and I did my homework. In the yard, we had some chickens, a small vegetable garden, and a mulberry tree that was the joy of the neighborhood children when it bore fruit. Life wasn't easy, but it was good. We woke with the rooster's crow and went to bed early, after my father told a story he made up on the spot. The stories always had talking forest animals that taught lessons about honesty and kindness. I loved these stories and kept many of them in my memory to tell to my own children and grandchildren years later. At school, I was diligent. Teacher Elizabeth said I had a knack for studies and should continue after elementary school, maybe even go to high school in the big city. I dreamed of that, dreamed of becoming a teacher, just like her. My childhood days were full of simple games. We played hopscotch in the yard, ring around the rosy, jump rope, and made corn husk dolls. My best friend was Celia, daughter of Mr. Orville, who owned the corner store. We were always together, almost like sisters. She taught me how to braid hair, and I taught her to embroider, an art I learned from my mother since I was 6 years old. On Sundays, we all went to Mass at the little Baptist church. Afterward, when possible, we'd have ice cream in the town square. It was a rare luxury, but my father insisted whenever he could. Sunday is a day to gladden the heart, he would say. It was on a Sunday, when I was 9, that my life began to change. I remember it like it was yesterday. We were returning from church when my father started coughing, an ugly cough that wouldn't stop. My mother was alarmed, but he said it was nothing, just road dust. But it wasn't dust. The next day, the cough came with a high fever. In a week, my father was bedridden with pneumonia that Dr. Vincent's medicines, the only doctor in town, couldn't cure. In those days, the nearest hospital was in Indianapolis, almost 40 miles away. When we finally managed to take my father there, it was already too late. The disease had taken over his lungs. He stayed in the hospital for 2 weeks, withering day by day until his body couldn't take it anymore. I had just turned 10 when I became half an orphan. My father's death left a huge hole in our family. Suddenly, my mother found herself alone with 4 children to raise. Chuck, who was only 8, tried to help by doing odd jobs on farms, but he earned a pittance. My mother sewed day and night, her eyes almost closing from so much sleep deprivation. But even so, the money barely bought food. It was during this time that we began to experience real hardship. There were days when we dined on just thin cornmeal mush with a little lard. My mother always said she wasn't hungry, so there would be more for us, but I saw her getting thinner and more haggard each day. Her eyes, which used to light up when my father came home, were now always red from crying in secret. A year after my father's death, my mother met Harold Fitzgerald at a 4th of July celebration. He was a truck driver, transporting agricultural products to Chicago and other big cities. A tall man with a smooth way of talking and friendly manner. He started showing up at our house bringing gifts, a pack of cream-filled cookies for us kids, a nice piece of fabric for my mother. He said he wanted to help a beautiful and hardworking widow. My mother, poor thing, saw in him a lifeline for our family drowning in debt. 6 months later, they married in a simple ceremony at the same church where we had held my father's wake. I remember Daisy crying the whole time, saying she didn't want another father. Chuck kept a sullen face, not talking to anyone. Only George, who was very young and barely remembered our real father, seemed happy with the news. As for me, I felt something strange in my stomach, like a bad feeling, but couldn't explain what. After all, Harold had always been polite to me, even gave me a new notebook for school, something I hadn't had in a long time. In the first week after the wedding, everything seemed fine. Harold helped fix the roof that leaked when it rained, replaced some rotten floorboards, even painted the yard fence. My mother was smiling again, and that made me happy. But soon, things started to change. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible. A lingering look in my direction during dinner. A compliment that made me uncomfortable. A hand that accidentally touched my shoulder or my hair when my mother wasn't looking. Time passed, and those accidental looks and touches from Harold became more frequent, more bold. I was 12 when things got much worse. I remember clearly because it was right after my first period. My mother had explained the basics, given me some cloths she had sewn for me to use, and said that now I was becoming a young lady. It was as if that had lit a light in my stepfather's eyes, a light that froze me inside. At that time, our house had undergone some changes. Harold convinced my mother that we needed more space, so he himself built another room at the back. The boys had one room, Daisy and I another. He said that I, as the oldest, needed privacy now that I was becoming a young woman. Little did I know that privacy would be the thing I would have the least of in the years to come. It all started on a night when my mother needed to stay at the hospital with George, who had caught a bad case of pneumonia. Harold stayed home with us. After Chuck and Daisy fell asleep, he came to my room with some excuse, saying he was worried about me, that I had been very quiet. He sat on the edge of my bed, ran his hand through my hair. I was lying down, curled up like a frightened animal, my heart beating so hard I thought it would come out of my mouth. "Martha, you know I like you very much, don't you?" he said in that smooth voice of his. "You're the oldest child, the most responsible one. Your mother is very proud of you, and so am I." I couldn't answer. There was a knot in my throat. "You're already becoming a young lady. So pretty. You need to learn some things about life." His hand moved from my hair to my shoulder and then lower. I closed my eyes tight, pretending I was asleep. Maybe if he thought I had fallen asleep, he would leave. But that's not what happened. What happened that night, and on so many others afterward, is something I can't describe in words. It's not that I don't remember. I remember every detail, every smell, every sound. It's that some things are too difficult even to pronounce. They hurt just to think about. That was the first of many nights when Harold would come to my room when everyone was asleep. In the beginning, he was careful not to leave marks, not to make noise. He said it was our little secret, that no one would believe me if I told, that they would blame me, say I had provoked him. And worst of all, he said that if I told, he would do the same to Daisy, who was only 9 at the time. It was this threat that kept me silent. I could endure anything, and I did, to protect my little sister. I tried to tell my mother once, indirectly. I said that Harold was messing with me, that he came to my room at night. She got angry, slapped me across the face. She said I was making things up, that I should be ashamed to speak that way about the man who was supporting our family, that without him we would all be starving. That day, I understood I was alone in this fight. Chuck, my brother, began to suspect something when I was about 13. He saw me crying in secret, noticed the looks of terror I cast at Harold. One night, he asked me directly, "He's doing something to you, isn't he?" I didn't need to respond. My silence and my tears said it all. My brother, who at the time was only 11, wanted to confront Harold. I begged him not to do that. "He's much stronger than you, Chuck. He'll hurt you, and then it'll be worse for me." He understood, but tried to protect me in his own way. He would make up excuses to stay near me at night, saying he was afraid of storms and coming to sleep on the floor of my room. It worked sometimes, but not always. At school, my performance began to fall. I, who had always been a good student, could now barely concentrate. I slept at my desk because I spent nights wide awake, afraid. Teacher Elizabeth called my mother in for a talk, said she was worried about me, that I seemed frightened all the time, that I had lost the sparkle in my eyes. "It's just teenage phase," my mother responded, not looking directly at the teacher. "She's finding herself, wanting attention." As time passed, Harold became bolder. He was no longer content with just nighttime visits. He began to corner me in parts of the house when no one was looking, to grope me while I washed dishes, to make indecent comments about my body in front of others, disguised as jokes. One day when I was 14, my friend Celia saw me crying behind the school. She sat beside me and asked what was happening. Something in her look, in the genuine concern, made me almost tell everything. Almost. But Harold's threats echoed in my head. What he would do to Daisy, how he would hurt Chuck if he knew I had spoken. "Just trouble at home," I lied. Celia didn't believe me. "Martha, I've known you since we learned to walk. I know when you're lying." I looked away. "There are things you can't tell anyone, Celia, not even best friends." She was silent for a while, then said something I never forgot. "When we keep bad things inside us, they grow like poison. If you can't talk, Write. Write on paper and burn it afterward. At least it won't all stay trapped in there. That advice changed my life. That very day, I took an old school notebook and started writing. I wrote everything, every horrible detail, every night of terror, every threat. I wrote about how I felt dirty, used, how I was ashamed to exist. I wrote about how I dreamed of running away, of taking my siblings far from that house. I wrote and cried until I had no more tears. When I finished, I hid the notebook in a hole I discovered under a loose board beneath my bed. I didn't have the courage to burn it as Celia suggested. Those words, as painful as they were the only proof I had that I wasn't crazy, that all this was really happening. Harold's nighttime visits began to follow a pattern. Every time he returned from a trip, after spending a few days on the road with the truck, the first night was the worst. It was as if he had saved up all the wickedness to pour out at once. These were the nights I feared most. Over time, I learned some tricks to try to protect myself. I slept with several layers of clothing. I piled objects at the door that would make noise if someone entered. Sometimes I pretended to be very sick, with fever or stomach pain. None of this helped much. The worst of all was the ritual of humiliation that he made a point of maintaining. The abuse itself wasn't enough. He needed to make me feel small, defenseless. Before anything else, he forced me to kneel in front of him as if I were praying. "This is for you to learn your place," he would say. That moment, kneeling on the cold floor, was almost worse than everything that came after. My mother. I think deep down she knew, or at least suspected. But she chose not to see. She chose the security of having a man in the house, a provider. How many times did I catch her crying alone in the kitchen late at night? How many times did I see her gaze shifting from mine when Harold left my room? It was as if we had made a silent pact. I didn't say anything. She didn't ask anything. The years passed, and that nightmare became my routine. When I turned 15, I realized I was no longer a frightened little girl. I was a young woman with anger growing in my chest. An anger that I had to hide, mask with obedience and fear, but that boiled inside like water on a wood stove. Harold continued with his truck trips, sometimes bringing presents for everyone. "Look what a good man thinks of everyone," my mother would say, proud. For the others, he gave sweets, cheap toys, hair ribbons. For me, he saved other things, which happened when everyone was asleep. The ritual remained the same. He would enter my room, order me to kneel, and then came the hell that lasted minutes that seemed an eternity. Over time, I stopped crying. The tears dried up, as if my body had understood that it wasn't worth spending all that water. I would stay still, looking at a fixed point on the wall, waiting for it to end. One night, after he left my room, I was thinking about how he insisted on that humiliation, the kneeling. It was more than abuse. It was a demonstration of power. He needed to see me on my knees to feel powerful. This revelation planted a seed inside me, a little seed of revolt that gradually took root. At school, the new teacher, Mrs. Martha, called me after class one day. "Martha, you're intelligent, but your head is always far away. Did something happen?" I shook my head, denying as I always did. She continued, "You know, when I was your age, I also went through difficult things at home. If you want to talk, I'm here." I looked at her, surprised. It was the first time an adult seemed to really understand that something was wrong, without me needing to say anything. But even so, I couldn't speak. Harold's threats were always present in my head. "Thank you, teacher," was all I could say. At this time, my brother Chuck, who was now 13, began to confront Harold more openly. He didn't say anything specific about what he knew, but questioned orders, talked back, stayed between me and our stepfather whenever he could. Harold didn't like this at all. One day, he caught Chuck answering back, and beat him so badly that the boy had a black eye for 2 weeks. "This is to learn to respect who brings food home," he said, while my mother cried softly in a corner without the courage to interfere. After that day, Chuck came to talk to me, his eye still swollen. "Martha," he said, using my childhood nickname, "we need to get out of here. I'll save money, work wherever I can, and we'll run away. Take Daisy and George too. And how will we live, Chuck? We're all still minors." "I don't know, but we'll find a way. Anything is better than this." That conversation lit a small flame of hope. Chuck started working after school, doing odd jobs carrying bags at the market, helping load and unload trucks. Every penny he earned, he hid in a hole in the wall, behind a loose brick in their little room. Meanwhile, I continued writing in my notebook. I had already filled almost all the pages. Writing was my only escape valve, the only way not to go completely insane. Sometimes I reread what I had written months before and saw how that nightmare had evolved, how it got worse each time. It was like a diary of my personal hell. One night, I woke up startled by a noise. It wasn't Harold. He was traveling. It was my mother, rummaging through my things. I pretended to still be sleeping, spying through half-closed eyes. I saw when she found the notebook hidden in that hole under the loose board. My heart raced. She took the notebook and left the room. I lay there, paralyzed, my heart beating so hard it felt like it would break my ribs. What would happen now? Would she finally understand? Would she help me? Or would she blame me again? I didn't sleep at all for the rest of the night. Early in the morning, when I got up to help with breakfast, my mother was already in the kitchen. I looked at her, trying to decipher her expression, but she acted as if nothing had happened. She didn't mention the notebook. She didn't say anything different from normal. That night, I desperately looked for the notebook in my hiding place, but it was no longer there. My mother had taken it. But why? To confront Harold? To protect me? To burn and erase the evidence? The answer came 2 days later, when Harold returned from his trip. Everything was normal during dinner. Him telling stories from the road, my mother laughing at his unfunny jokes, my siblings eating in silence. I could barely swallow the food, imagining what would come later. As always, everyone went to bed, and I stayed in my room, waiting for the inevitable. The door opened, and he entered. But there was something different. He wasn't alone. My mother was with him. I stared at them, confused, scared. My mother was holding something in her hands, my notebook. "I found this," she said, her voice colder than I had ever heard before. "Such imagination you have, girl." Harold took the notebook, flipped through some pages, and laughed. "So this is what you've been writing? Horror stories about me?" "They're not stories," I managed to say, my voice trembling. "It's all true." My mother approached the bed. "True? You think anyone will believe this? That my husband, a respected man, does these things to you? Everyone will think you're making it up, that you're crazy." It was at that moment that I understood. My mother not only knew, but was complicit. She had chosen his side. "You should be grateful," she continued. "Grateful to have a roof, food on the table. Without him, we would be nothing. And this is how you repay? By writing these lies?" Harold put the notebook on top of the dresser. "You know what I think, Eleanor? I think the girl needs to learn a lesson. Learn to respect the family." My mother nodded. "I agree." It was the longest night of my life. With my mother sitting in a chair in the corner of the room, watching, Harold did what he always did. But worse, much worse, as if he wanted to prove a point, as if he wanted to break me for good. And the whole time, I had to look at the impassive face of my own mother, who didn't move a muscle to help me. When it finally ended, and they left the room, I lay looking at the ceiling, without tears, without anything. A huge emptiness had taken hold of me. Something inside me had broken that night. Not my strength, but my hope that someday someone would save me. I understood that if I wanted to get out of that hell, I would have to do it myself. The next morning, my mother acted as if nothing had happened. She served coffee, talked about the weather, planned lunch. The notebook was on the kitchen table, exposed, like a sick trophy of their victory over me. When everyone left, Harold for work, my mother to take the younger ones to school, and Chuck for one of his odd jobs, I took the notebook. I thought about burning it, destroying that proof of my humiliation. But something stopped me. Instead, I sat at the table and began to leaf through the pages, rereading my own suffering written in a trembling teenage hand. It was there, at that table, with the sun coming through the kitchen window, that I had an idea. A terrible and brilliant idea at the same time. If that notebook had been used against me, maybe I could use it too. Not as evidence, no one would believe it anyway, my mother was right about that. But as inspiration. In the garage, where Harold kept his work things, there were various tools and products. Among them, a large tube of industrial glue, the strong kind he used for small repairs on the truck. A glue that, according to him, sticks even the soul in place. I took the notebook and wrote one last entry. But this one wasn't about the past, it was about the future. About how I would make that man pay for every night of terror he put me through. About how I would use against him the very humiliation he so liked to impose on me. That night, after what happened with my mother in the notebook, I couldn't sleep. I lay looking out the window, seeing the stars in the Westfield sky, thinking that somewhere, under the same sky, there were people living normal lives, without fear of falling asleep in their own beds. I decided that I deserved that life too. I spent the next 3 days observing Harold's routine with an attention I had never devoted before. I noticed how he kept certain things always in the same place, how he had rituals before sleeping and after waking up. And mainly, I observed where he kept those objects he used during his nighttime visits. In a drawer of the dresser in his and my mother's room, there was a small wooden box. Once, when no one was home, I had the courage to look inside it. That's where he kept those little rubber things that he always took out of his pocket before. Well, you understand. He was careful with this, at least. Perhaps the only care he had. It was then that the plan began to take shape in my head. I wouldn't need weapons or poisons. The tool of my liberation was already there, in the garage, in that tube of industrial glue. A glue so strong that, according to Harold himself, even hot water won't remove. I had to wait for the right moment. A night when my mother wouldn't be home, when I could act without interruptions. The opportunity arose sooner than I expected. Aunt Judith, my mother's sister who lived in Indianapolis, had a stroke. It wasn't serious, but she needed someone to help in the first days at home after the hospital. My mother decided she would go, taking George and Daisy with her. Chuck would stay for his jobs, and I would stay to take care of the house. "Don't worry," Harold said to my mother as she packed her suitcase. "I'll take care of Martha." The look they exchanged told me everything I needed to know about what that meant. The day my mother left, I waited until Chuck went off to work and Harold went to the garage where his truck was being repaired. With the house empty, I went to their room and opened the drawer. The little box was there, as always. I took out one of those little packages, just one, so as not to raise suspicions, and took it with me to the garage. With my heart beating like a drum, I picked up the tube of industrial glue. I read the instructions carefully. Danger. Causes immediate and permanent adhesion on contact with skin. Use protective gloves. I found an old pair of gardening gloves and put them on. Very carefully, I opened the little package and put just a few drops of glue inside it, spreading it well around the inner edges. Then I sealed it again, exactly as it was before. I put it back in the little box, in the exact same place it was. The rest of the day passed in a blur of anxiety and fear. What if he discovered it before? What if it didn't work? And if it did work, what would happen afterward? I had no answers, just knew I couldn't live like that anymore. Chuck returned from work first. I prepared dinner for the two of us, as I always did. He noticed I was different. "What's wrong, Martha? You have a weird look." "It's nothing," I answered, trying to appear normal. "Just worried about Aunt Judith." He seemed to believe it, or at least pretended to believe it. After dinner, I went to my room early, saying I had a headache. In truth, I didn't want to be around when Harold arrived. I didn't know if I could look at him without my face giving everything away. I lay in bed, waiting. I heard when Harold arrived, when he talked briefly with Chuck, when he went to take a shower. Every sound in the house seemed amplified that night. The creaking of the floorboards, the water running in the pipes, even the wind in the leaves of the mulberry tree outside. I pretended to be asleep when he came to check if I was in the room. I felt his gaze on me for long seconds before he closed the door. That wouldn't be the night. He was tired, said something about having to wake up early to pick up the truck. I would have to wait. The next 3 days were pure tension. My mother called to say she would stay longer with her sister, maybe a week. Harold continued his normal routine, leaving early, returning late. I walked around the house like a ghost, waiting, always waiting. It was on the 4th night after my mother had left that he finally came to my room. As always, late at night, when he thought Chuck was asleep. As always, he ordered me to kneel. As always, he unzipped his pants and took one of those little packages from his pocket. I did what he ordered, kneeling on the cold floor, but this time it was different. This time, I knew what was coming, and it wasn't just the usual horror. It was my liberation. I won't go into details about what happened next. I don't need to, and I don't want to. I'll just say that at the moment he realized something was wrong, that something was sticking where it shouldn't. It was already too late. The glue had already taken effect. First came confusion, then pain, and then panic. He tried to free himself, pull, tear it off, which only made everything worse. The screams started low, muffled by the attempt not to wake anyone. But soon they transformed into howls of pain and despair. Chuck woke up with the noise and came running to my room. The scene he found must have been etched in his mind forever. His stepfather, partially undressed, writhing in pain, stuck to himself in the most humiliating way possible. What happened?" Chuck asked, eyes wide. "I think he had an accident," I replied, with a calmness I didn't know I had. "Better call for help." Harold, between screams of pain, looked at me with a mixture of hatred and supplication. "No, don't call anyone. Help me." But I was already picking up the phone. In those days, there was no 911 yet. I called the only emergency number we knew, the fire department. "Emergency, what's your problem?" said the voice on the other end of the line. "My stepfather, he had an accident. Something is glued to him. He can't get loose. He's in a lot of pain." There was a pause on the other end. "Glued? What do you mean glued?" "Industrial glue," I answered. "He was fixing something and now he's stuck." The man on the other end of the line must have understood more than I said, because after a moment of silence he just said, "We're on our way. Stay calm." The minutes that followed were chaotic. Harold, lying on the floor of my room, writhing in pain. Chuck, standing at the door, alternating between shocked looks at his stepfather and questioning looks at me. And I, sitting on the bed, observing everything as if watching a movie on television. When the firefighters arrived, the lights of the truck illuminated the whole street. Curious neighbors began to come out of their houses to see what was happening. The noise of the siren woke up almost the entire block. The firefighters, there were 4 men, entered the house with medical equipment. When they saw the situation, there was a moment of shock, followed by a professionalism that I admire to this day. They didn't laugh, they didn't make comments, they just clinically assessed the problem. "We need to take him to the hospital," said the one who seemed to be the chief. "This will need specialized medical attention." They put Harold on a stretcher, covering him as best they could, but there was no way to completely hide the nature of the accident. As they carried him out, he looked at me one last time. In that look, I saw that he knew that it had been no accident at all. "Does someone need to accompany him?" one of the firefighters asked. "It's just the two of us at home," I answered, indicating me and Chuck. "We're minors. Our mother is traveling." The firefighter nodded. "Is there someone we can call? Any relative?" "There's our aunt in Indianapolis, but it's far. And she's sick." "I understand. Well, we'll take him to the hospital. You two stay here. Is there a neighbor who can stay with you until we resolve this?" Chuck suggested Mrs. Gwen, a lady who lived next door and had always been good to us. The firefighters went to her, explained the situation, or at least part of it, and Mrs. Gwen came to stay with us. The ambulance left, taking Harold to the hospital in Indianapolis, the only one that would have resources to handle that kind of emergency. We found out later that they had to call a specialist doctor from Chicago who took hours to arrive. The case was unprecedented in the region. That same night, sitting in the living room with Mrs. Gwen, Chuck asked me in a low voice, "It was you, wasn't it? Did it on purpose?" I looked into his eyes. "He will never touch me again, Chuck. Never again." My brother didn't say anything for a moment, then just nodded. "Good." In the morning, the police came to our house. Such a strange accident raised suspicions. They took me to the police station to ask questions. It was there, sitting in a room with a sheriff and a social worker, that I finally told everything. The notebook, the nights of terror, my mother's complicity, the glue plan. At first, I saw disbelief in their eyes. But as I spoke, as I described in details that no 15-year-old girl should know, the disbelief gave way to indignation, and then to anger, not at me, but for me. "Why didn't you tell before?" the social worker asked, holding my hand. "He threatened to do the same thing to my sister," I replied. "And when I tried to tell my mother, she didn't believe me, or pretended not to believe." The woman squeezed my hand harder. "Now you're safe. He won't touch you anymore." The sheriff, a man already of a certain age, remained silent for a long time after I finished my account. Finally, he said, "You know what you did was dangerous, don't you? It could have gone very wrong." "I know," I replied. "But it had already been going very wrong for years." He nodded, as if he understood. "We'll make sure you and your siblings stay safe. Your mother is coming back today. She'll have a lot to answer for, too." When my mother returned from Indianapolis with Daisy and George, she already found the house full of police officers and social workers. The look on her face as she entered and saw all those people was something I'll never forget. First shock, then confusion, and finally fear when she realized that her castle of lies had crumbled. "What's happening here?" she asked, holding George's hand tightly. It was Sheriff Howard who answered. "Mrs. Fitzgerald, we need to talk about your daughter Martha and your husband Harold." They took her to a separate room, while a social worker, Miss Marlene, stayed with us in the kitchen. She was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and hands that seemed to have held many other trembling hands like mine. "Now you're safe," she assured us, serving a glass of water to each one. "No one is going to hurt you." Daisy, at 12 years old, didn't really understand what was happening. George, then, at only 10, even less. Only Chuck, sitting beside me, knew the truth. He took my hand under the table and squeezed it, a silent gesture of support that was worth more than 1,000 words. My mother's screams began a few minutes later. "Lies! She's lying! My husband would never do that!" Daisy started crying, frightened by the screams. Miss Marlene hugged her, trying to calm her. "It's all right, dear. It's just adults talking. Sometimes adults speak loudly when the subject is difficult." But it wasn't just speaking loudly. My mother was desperate seeing her world collapse. When she finally came out of the room, her face was red and swollen from crying. She looked at me with a mixture of anger and something else, something that almost seemed like regret. "Why, Martha? Why did you do this to our family?" Before I could answer, the sheriff intervened. "Ma'am, the evidence is clear. Your daughter's testimony, the medical statements about your husband's condition, even the notebook we found in the house. Everything confirms the systematic abuse." "Notebook? What notebook?" she asked, confused. "The notebook where your daughter wrote about everything that happened. The very same one that you showed to your husband to humiliate her." Her face turned pale. I didn't. It was then that I understood. She had never read the notebook. She had found it, yes, but only shown it to Harold without really reading the contents. Perhaps for fear of confirming what deep down she already knew, perhaps out of cowardice. This explained why she didn't seem prepared for the accusations now. In the days that followed, our life was turned upside down. Harold remained in the hospital, but under police custody. The accident had caused serious damage that required surgery. The doctor who came from Chicago managed to unstick him without permanent damage, but the public humiliation was already done. The story of the man who glued himself spread through the town like wildfire. My mother was indicted for negligence and complicity, even as she continued to deny that she knew anything. The four of us, me, Chuck, Daisy, and George, were temporarily sent to my paternal grandmother's house, Grandma Clara, who lived in a small town called Maryville, about 80 miles from Westfield. Grandma Clara was a strong woman who had raised 6 children practically alone after my grandfather died young. She welcomed us with open arms, especially me. "My brave little granddaughter," she would say, stroking my hair. "You did what you needed to do to defend yourself. Don't be ashamed of that." It was she who helped me understand that what had happened wasn't my fault, that I hadn't provoked anything, as Harold always said, that I was just a child who had been the victim of a monster, and now I was free. Harold's trial happened 6 months later. I had to testify, tell everything again in front of a judge and other people. It was hard, but I did it. I took the notebook with me. The same one that had been used against me was now the main evidence against him. Every word I wrote on those pages, every night of terror documented, served to condemn him. He got 15 years in prison. My mother had a separate trial. She continued to deny that she knew, but the evidence against her was strong. Chuck's testimony about how she acted, about the nights we found her crying in the kitchen, about how she ignored obvious signs. In the end, she was sentenced to 3 years, but got house arrest because she had no prior record. Our life at Grandma Clara's house was a fresh start. For the first time in years, I could sleep without fear. Her house was small but cozy. It had a yard with fruit trees where we spent the afternoons. She enrolled us in the local school and insisted that we continue studying. "Education is the only thing no one can take away from you," she would say. And she was right. I was 16 at this time and 2 years behind in school because of all the trauma I had been through. But with the support of Grandma Clara and the teachers at the new school, I managed to recover. I started getting good grades again, especially in English and literature. Writing, which before was my escape, now became my passion. Teacher Olivia, the literature teacher, was the first to notice my talent. "Martha, you write in a way that makes people feel the words," she told me one day, after reading an essay of mine. "Have you ever thought about being a writer?" I had never thought about that. In fact, I had never thought much about the future. For years, I lived just one day at a time, trying to survive. But now, free from that nightmare, new possibilities were opening up. When I turned 18, I received news that changed my life. I had been accepted with a full scholarship to study English at Indiana University. Grandma Clara's joy was so great that she made a special dinner, complete with chocolate cake and everything. "You see, my children," she said to my siblings during dinner, "Martha has shown that we can always start over, no matter how hard life has been." Chuck, who by this time was already working as an apprentice in a mechanic's shop in Maryville, raised his glass of soda in a toast. "To Martha, the bravest of us all." The day I moved to Bloomington to live in a student dorm near the university, I cried in my grandmother's arms. They weren't tears of sadness, but of gratitude. She had taken me in when I was broken and helped me put the pieces back together. "Go, my child," she whispered in my ear. "Go build your life. You deserve all the happiness in the world." The university opened a whole world for me. I met different people, new ideas, discovered authors who spoke to my soul. I graduated in English and soon after did a specialization in American literature. It was during this course that I met Louis, my husband of almost 50 years now. He was an assistant professor, a few years older than me, a gentle man with kind eyes and a shy manner. At first, I was afraid of any male approach. The years of abuse had left deep scars. But Louis was patient, respected my pace, never pressured me. Our love story was as it should be, built on mutual respect, long conversations, shared discoveries. When he proposed to me, 2 years after we met, I no longer had doubts. This was a man with whom I wanted to build a life. I married at 24, in a simple ceremony at the church in Maryville, with Grandma Clara crying with emotion in the front row. My mother wasn't invited. After serving her sentence, she had moved to Arizona, and we rarely kept in touch. My siblings followed different paths, but always remained united. Chuck became a respected mechanic in Maryville, married the boss's daughter, and had 3 children. Daisy became a teacher and went to teach at a rural school near Madison. George, the youngest, went the farthest. He studied agronomy and now works for a multinational in Chicago. Louis and I decided to move to Virginia in 1985, when he received an invitation to teach at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville. It was quite a change, from the Midwest to the East Coast, from flat lands to the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains. But we adapted and loved our new life. In 1995, after 10 years in Charlottesville, we decided to retire and move to a smaller and more peaceful town. That's how we ended up in Oak Ridge, where I am to this day. Louis passed away 5 years ago, victim of a heart attack while he slept. It was a peaceful departure, as he deserved. Today, at 73, I have a peaceful and blessed life here in Oak Ridge. My little house is on a quiet street, with a generous yard where I grow my medicinal herbs and flowers. There's a mulberry tree, just like the one from my childhood, which I planted when I moved here. It took years to bear fruit, but it was worth the wait. Every time I eat a mulberry, it's like going back in time and being again that carefree girl before everything happened. My day begins early, with the birds singing. I get up, make my coffee on the wood stove I insist on keeping, even though I have a brand new gas stove that my oldest son gave me as a gift. They say I'm stubborn, but it's just that coffee on a wood stove has another flavor, doesn't it? It tastes of good memories, of comfort. After coffee, I go tend to my little plants. I have a bit of everything: mint for digestive tea, rosemary to season chicken, chamomile to calm the nerves, lemon balm for the heart. Each has its special corner, each receives water and conversation. Because plants are like people, they like attention and affection. I have 3 wonderful children: Ben, who is an engineer and lives in Richmond; Mary, a teacher like I was, who lives right here in Oak Ridge; and the youngest, Jack, who followed in his father's footsteps and teaches history at the university in Norfolk; and 6 grandchildren who are the light of my eyes. 2 are already in college. Imagine that. How time flies. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, as I mentioned before, I teach embroidery at the Women's Association. It started as a pastime, but ended up becoming something important in the community. I've taught more than 100 women over these years. Some come just to learn cross-stitch, others to pass the time, but many, and this fills my heart with joy, come because they need a safe place to talk. You see, embroidery has this magic. While the hands work, the tongue loosens and the heart opens. There, among colorful threads and hoops, many secrets have been told, many tears have been wiped away. And I, who know well what it's like to keep a painful secret, listen to everything without judging. Sometimes, just listening already helps. On other days of the week, I receive visits from my grandchildren, make my little sweets, the creamy cornbread is the children's favorite, and take care of the house. In the late afternoon, I like to sit on the porch with a cup of tea and watch the movement on the street. The children returning from school, the neighbors passing by and waving, the mailman delivering letters. My house is simple, but it's full of love. The walls are decorated with embroideries I've made over the years. Each tells a story. The first I made after moving here. The one I embroidered when my first grandchild was born. The most elaborate one, which took me 6 months to finish and even won a prize at the town's craft fair. I keep in touch with my siblings, of course. Chuck, who now everyone calls Charles, a name he insists on using, comes to visit me twice a year, brings his wife and children. He's a grandfather too now. Daisy lives farther away in North Carolina, but always sends letters and photos. George, even living in Chicago, is the one who calls most, every week, without fail. "I'm checking if you haven't found a new boyfriend," he jokes. With my mother, the story is different. After everything that happened, we went many years without speaking. When my first child was born, I sent a letter with the news, but she never responded. Years later, when Grandma Clara passed away, she showed up at the wake. She was aged, haggard. We exchanged few words. She tried to apologize in her way without really saying the words. "I didn't know what to do, Martha," was what she said. "I was afraid of being alone with the 4 of you." I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. I understood that she too was a victim, in her way, victim of fear, of dependency, of her own cowardice. I forgave in the sense of not harboring hatred, but we never had a close relationship again. She passed away about 10 years ago in Phoenix, where she lived with a brother. I went to the funeral, paid my last respects, and made peace with that part of my history. As for Harold, I never saw him again after the trial. I learned that he served the full sentence without reduction because he tried to escape twice. When he got out of prison, he was already an old man. According to what I was told, he went to live in the interior of California, where he died some years later, alone and forgotten. I feel nothing for him, neither hatred nor pity. It's like a turned page of a book I no longer want to read. The memories of those difficult years still come to visit me sometimes, especially in dreams. I wake up frightened, with my heart beating fast, but soon I remember that I'm safe, that it's in the past. Louis, when he was alive, would hold me in these moments, say nothing, just be there, holding me until I calmed down. After he left, I learned to calm myself. I get up, make a cup of chamomile tea, look at the stars through the window, breathe deeply. I learned that wounds can heal, even the deepest ones. Of course, the scar remains, and sometimes it hurts when the weather changes, as the old folks say. But the pain no longer commands my life. I managed to transform it into something different, perhaps even into strength. This strength allowed me to raise my children without fear, teaching them about respect, about boundaries, about how to truly love. Louis was a great partner in this, an upright, patient man who never raised his voice or his hand to anyone. The kind of man I wanted my sons to become, and they did. Today, when I see my grandchildren growing up, I feel a joy I can't explain. They don't know the details of my story. I've only told the basics, that I went through hardships in childhood, that I went to live with their great-grandmother. The rest one day when they're older, perhaps I'll tell, or perhaps it won't be necessary. The important thing is that they are growing up in safe homes, with loving parents, without fear of going to sleep at night. When I look back, I see that my life was like a complex embroidery. From a distance, it's beautiful, with patterns and colors that harmonize. Up close, you can see the knots, the seams, the stitches that came out crooked. But it's precisely this combination that makes each embroidery unique, isn't it? If I could give advice to the frightened girl I once was, I would say, hold on tight, because it will be worth it. Life will still give you so many joys that will compensate for every tear shed. And it's true. Each laugh from my grandchildren, each flower that blooms in my garden, each finished embroidery, each sincere hug from a student who became a friend, all these are small gifts that life has given me to compensate for the difficult years. Here in Oak Ridge, I found my little corner of peace. People respect me, call me Grandma Martha with affection. Few know my complete story, and that's fine. I don't define myself by what I went through, but by what I built afterward. I am the retired teacher, the lady of embroideries, the grandma who makes creamy cornbread, the neighbor who has herbal remedies for any problem. And that, my dears, is the greatest victory I could have, to live a common, peaceful life without upheavals. A life that many might find boring, but which for me is a true miracle. My dears, looking back, I see that my strength was born precisely where they tried to break me. I learned that age doesn't define our strength, but rather our capacity to start again each day. That notebook where I wrote my pains ended up being my salvation. The industrial glue I used on that desperate night taught me that even in the most difficult situations, we have a choice. My story is not about what they did to me, but about how I chose to respond. My wrinkles are maps of survival. Each one tells a story of pain overcome. Time doesn't heal all wounds, but it teaches us to live with them and still smile. If you're going through difficult times, know this: there is light at the end of the tunnel. Life taught me that even in the deepest darkness, our inner light never goes out. I discovered that we are stronger than we imagine, especially when we think we can't take it anymore. If you know someone suffering in silence, reach out, seek help, tell someone you trust. If you can't speak, write, as I did. I learned that true strength is not in never falling, but in rising every time. Abuse leaves invisible scars, but recovery shows that we can flourish even after the storm. I learned that surviving is a form of resistance, and living well is the best revenge. If this story touched your heart, if you felt that you are not alone, please now subscribe and hit the bell. Share with someone who needs to hear that there is life after trauma. Leave in the comments the word SCAR, so I know you understood the most important message. We can always start over. Do this now. Don't wait even one more minute. Just as I didn't wait to change my story, you don't need to wait to be part of this chain of hope. Thank you for listening to me. A hug from this grandma who learned that, even with hands trembling from age, she can still weave the threads of her own life into an embroidery full of colors and beauty.